Are you there?
Yes, I am. Hotep, sister. How are you?
Hotep. Great.
Good, good.
So tonight we're going to be talking about how feminizing of the human race. This is how come we see so much gay activities going on, and it's making it like it's normal. They have gay shows, gay network, and people that are gay are getting key positions, and they're headed towards legalizing that it's okay to have sex with children.
That's correct, sister. That's known as pedophilia, but that language will soon change from pedophilia to something else. We'll cover that as we go on. I don't think it's an accident that you can go back to the 70s, late 60s, when this entire sexual movement was ushered in. It was, in fact, a psychological construct. It was a psychological program that they were moving towards. And you might recall we talked about the school system being a part of that psychological movement, where the psychology department would be inundated throughout the entire school system now, such that the children would be getting labels and things like that. And that along with that psychological movement would come a whole slew of accompanying drugs to deal with the psychology of people, to alter the brain, to alter the thinking. But in line with those things, many of these pharmaceuticals that are known as SSRIs were also coated with a chemical called a patholate, that in fact, as I can go back and document it, is the origin of the explosion of homosexuality. And of course, I say understanding that this is part of the petrochemical or oil. Petrochemical is nothing but a byproduct of the oil industry, which is primarily controlled by the same ruling families. There are about a dozen of them who basically control almost every major natural resource on the planet. Much of this is being conducted by the petrochemical industry, and it's all about, as far as I can ascertain, population control. And I tell you something, sister. Mm-hmm. Unlike, what we normally see this as, I think after we get through today, I think that many people will probably look at homosexuality a little different than we did before, because it's not their fault. And once we understand the extent of this petrochemical industry, which has given us the pharmaceutical industry, we'll begin to understand why there are so many gays, both males and females. It's not like these people have been in the closet when I was a teenager. They just weren't out here in those significant numbers the way they are now.
No, it's not.
And I'll tell you something else, sister. To show you how it's part of a psychological construct, many of your listeners could probably go back, if they're in my age group. We were around during the changeover. We watched it being pushed, particularly through the music, where in the early 1970s, the music began to change. There began to be a definite influx of homosexuality through disco, where even the clothing changed from what we would know as traditional male colors to what would subsequently become associated with homosexual colors. We went from afros to jerry curls, and everybody wore chains and purses and those kinds of things. Some people saw it back then, but I don't think that they saw the extent of it. I think we can look in the late 70s, sister, and we can see the advent of the music changing dramatically with Prince and George Michael and the Culture Club with Boy George and just so many, Luther Vandross, Jesse Johnson, what's the other? It's just so many groups Prince being the pinnacle of that, creating controversy. Am I black or white? Am I straight or gay? That was the beginning of this move towards taking homosexuality mainstream. Little did we know that it would be a psychological program that was being pushed through the American Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association, and a book that they termed their Bible, the DSM, where they basically dictate what's allowable and what's not allowable psychologically. And the culture, and more importantly, the law will reflect what the psychological community says what's normal and what's not normal. So that we saw homosexuality by the 1980s began to be pushed right in everybody's face. And along with that, we saw, particularly those who were following hip-hop at that time, which I was, we saw hip-hop go from gangster rap in the late 1980s, early 1990s, to the 2000s. We've seen a sea change in hip-hop, where many people have talked about the homosexual influences, from Nicki Minaj on the female side to others on the male side, guys on the down low. So we began to see where it was normally hidden in the music industry. Now they're pushing it in your face, and as you said earlier, so it's all in the TV and the movies, and you name it, it's there, and you can't hardly go anywhere in terms of government and not see them flaunting their particular sexual persuasion in your face as well.
That is so true. And I talked to a couple of the guys that is in the hip hop community, and when I asked them about the homosexuality, what I got was the same answer. It's like it's a job, so it's like it's part of our job.
Right. Well, and I can understand what they're saying, but again, in many cases, they don't understand that they're being used to push a particular commodity, be it in their style of dress or whatever. You see, when they promote children in the magazines, let me give you a classic example, and I think this is really a shame, but they've allowed themselves to get caught up in this madness because they've decided to go for the money and basically put their ideals in their pockets. And I'm talking about Will and Jada. Jada, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And you really need to look at their kids. And you'll be scratching your head as to what in the hell is happening with these two little kids. The girl dresses like an adult prostitute. And the little boy, I don't know what he is. But that's a classic example of what I'm talking about, sister. And we saw it in the mid-'80s with Cyndi Lauper and Madonna. Back during the early 80s to mid-'80s, Madonna made lace famous or infamous, such that we began to see black women in the neighborhood dressing their little daughters in these little lace outfits, where that stuff used to be up under the clothes. Now it's outside of the clothes. Following these psychological trends and not really understanding where they were headed, where they were taking their children. Okay, and they're doing studies now which say that homosexuality is far more acceptable today than it was years ago. Well, that's because it's been pushed in our face on a consistent basis, but the vast majority of people are still against gay marriage, no matter where you go outside of San Francisco or Greenwich Village or the near north side of Chicago here, where they flying flags and, they had a little parades and the whole bit. And I must say, sister, as a heterosexual male, and I don't know what that term really means, I just say I have a severe fondness for women, okay? So I don't necessarily subscribe to their labels, but as a male, what I consider a normal male, I just can't, it's just something that can't accept another man having anal sex with another man. Although, I must say, based on the research here, I will defend, as long as they're pro-black, I'm talking about black people now, because I had the occasion to question a couple of gay sisters. And I told them I don't have no problem with what you do with your life, as long as you're black-oriented. And I found through a dialogue at one of my forums with them that in many cases, we've never had a dialogue with the homosexual community. And so we basically offer stereotypes as our vision for what homosexuals are. And again, that's based on Eurocentric thinking. In many cases, we know that culturally that's not a part of the accepted norm in Africa. However, I think that as we go along and outline the research, people are going to see this thing exploding everywhere. And they in fact, do have large gay communities in African cities and countries as well. So it's not like we're going to go anywhere and diminish these people. I think we need to understand what has happened to many of them, because all our children are eligible based on the chemical manipulation of their genetic code with the petrochemicals. So, sister, before I get into the meat of the matter, if I can, let me give some of these articles, because I know I'm not going to have time to deal with this, but it kind of deals with real life subversion, if you will, of various intelligence agencies and government officials who've been in the closet and or running child abuse, global pedophile rings, and things of that nature, with the CIA, MI5, MI6, and remember the former head of the FBI, Gay Hoover. Yeah, I said Gay. He too was gay, and it's interesting that there's a movie that just came out about him with that DiCaprio little guy.
Right.
So I think, again, all this is in line with what's really going on out here. But these stories people can just go and look up at their leisure. There was one group in particular, sister, called the Finders Group. The Finders Group, or just the Finders. The Finders. There's a story that came out in educateyourself.org. Educateyourself.org. It's entitled The Story of the CIA's Finders Abduction Operation. That's it was printed July 2005. July 2005. The CIA traffics in drugs, child ritual, sexual abuse, and global murder. Okay? So I'm not going to go into this article because I want to get to the more urbane attempt. And this is really interesting, sister. I think that what we really got to be aware of is that they are attempting to legalize pedophilia, as well as other abnormalities. Another article is... Yes, that too, okay? We see transvestites and things like that being, they call them LGBT and all this kind of thing, you know. Again, they create the psychological constructs and the names and the definitions to get you to accept these things as a part of the norm. And this is coming from the top down. This is not coming from the bottom up. But another very interesting article that deals with the finders as well was printed in U.S. News and World Report for December 19th, 1993, and it's called Through a Glass Very Darkly, Cops, Spies, and a Very Odd Investigation. And these finders guys were in fact busted running an international child kidnapping ring where many of the children were sent globally to the various customers to engage in sex via pedophilia, etc. Okay? Both of those articles will deal with that. What's interesting, sister, is once that situation was exposed as a CIA-run operation, it was summarily shut down, totally shut down, and that's not unprecedented. One other article is entitled, in terms of Britain, because this just ain't the United States. Again, this is a global phenomenon. But Tony Blair was cold busted according to Counterpunch magazine for January 29, 2003. This article is entitled "Blackout in Britain: Alleged Pedophiles at the Helm of Blair's War Room." And it points to all of the pedophiles at the very upper echelon of Tony Blair's government. But if you go and check the homosexuality in Britain, you'll find that it's been an accepted part of the norm, going all the way back to the turn of the last century. But it had a major impact on public policy at the very conclusion of World War II, with even some of the Rothschilds engaged in, during the wartime, engaged in major homosexual activity with other people inside the intelligence community. Again, that's alleged pedophiles at the helm of Blair's War Room. Counterpunch magazine, January 29, 2003. Here's another article directly dealing with that. It's entitled, "Blair Covering Up Pedophile Scandal." Blair Covering Up Pedophile Scandal. That's from tpuc.org. tpuc.org. The interesting thing about these articles and this whole situation with Blair Sister is that he passed something called a D-notice because there were so many people based on a mass murder that occurred in Britain by a pedophile with a gun given to him by a member of Blair's upper echelon in his cabinet, where he murdered a lot of kids. And as a result of that, they found out that he used his Masonic connections to get the gun for a guy who they considered not eligible to carry a gun in Britain. And this is basically the beginning of the outlawing of weapons in Britain. Okay? So you can find that information with Tony Blair. Now, here's what's really interesting, sister. You recall when we dealt with the program on H1N1, the swine flu.
Right.
And we pointed out that the swine flu was released on the Mexican border by a paramilitary organization called Dying Corps. We further went on to point out that Dying Corps owned major patents in the swine flu or H1N1 vaccine patents, and that they would get filthy rich. Dying Corps is the sister organization to Blackwater. Okay? Just so your audience knows. In 2002, they were directly implicated in running a worldwide pedophilia ring. Anybody who wants to read about that pedophile ring can check Corp Watch, C-O-R-P Watch, for May the 13th, 2002, Sex Scandal Still Haunts Dying Corps. Sex Scandal Still Haunts Dying Corps. They can go to salon.com for August the 6th, 2002, Dying Corps ex-slave whistleblower vindicated. Dying Corps sex-slave whistleblower vindicated. And then they can go and get this last article dealing with Dying Corps entitled, and this too is from Court Watch. It's entitled Dying Corps Disgrace. Dying Corps Disgrace. Dying Corps is spelled D-Y-N-C-O-R-P. That's for January the 14th, 2002. And so you can see when you hear people talking about the intelligence community running child pedophile rings, that's not outside of the norm. You will find that just like the CIA shut down the Finders investigation, that memo that Tony Blair issued shut down his involvement and his cabinet's involvement in pedophilia. Okay? Now, I must say this as well, sister. Anybody, as far as I'm concerned, that wants to make the sexual molestation of 2- and 3-year-old children, I don't know how you would classify that other than a sick individual.
Yeah, they're insane. Someone in the chat room wants to know, what was the name of the first article you gave with the Finders, educateyourself.org? What was the name of the article?
The story of the CIA's Finders abduction operation. The CIA traffics in drugs, child ritual sexual abuse, and global murder. It's from educateyourself.org.
Mm-hmm. But, I noticed that every time that when you give us the information, it all goes back to the CIA.
That's because, sister, we are living in a national security state. At the conclusion of World War II, with the chest thumping of Skull and Bones, where many of the members of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the forerunner to Skull and Bones, many of those people went directly into Skull and Bones, and the national security apparatus was put in place. That, in fact, was the takeover of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned everybody about. That's what he was talking about. And you can go back and look at that point, from that point on, when they divided up the world to keep people docile, under the illusion that there was some so-called Soviet wall. These were for the most part, two Jewish groups, because the State of Israel was set up at that particular point as well. So we saw that national security apparatus get put in place with these two groups of white people fighting each other for who was going to control the world, who in fact was going to be at the head of the so-called New World Order. And what people are now finding out, which is why you got the Occupy Wall Street movements all over the place, is that the same thing that the Soviet Union used to be is what this country and other countries are being turned into today.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States can go all over the planet and assassinate people. That's to set you up here. That's for those of you who still love Barack Obama with his murdering ass. And since I must say that for 2 days I was kind of like in a fog after they killed the one black man in the last 100 years who has done more for African people in the last 100 years than any other black man on the planet. To have him murdered by a black man, and then to have these Negro people on the radio, the so-called radio talk show hosts, basically making all kind of excuses, jumping through hoops backwards to justify what Barack Obama has done, along with killing hundreds of Somalians with no news coverage, so to speak of, as well as now sending military intelligence inside Uganda because they've found huge oil deposits in that region. So, it's always, Negroes doing the bidding of white people. Always, sister. And Barack Obama is no different from the rest of these white people. And I don't know. As a matter of fact,
he's worse.
Yes. And I think now black people are starting to see it. Although you still have the disinformation people who on the Democratic Party payroll who go out here and lie to their mama to get $25 or $30. People like Al Sharpton. And I wonder if he really has a mama. Because you can't sit in a position of responsibility and not know all the things from South Africa to just every African liberation movement of the past 40 years. Gaddafi has been right there lending support. Even Nelson Mandela thanked him for his support. So, Obama hasn't done anything for black people but tell them to stop crying and stop bitching and moaning, while he summarily murders people all over the planet. And as I started to say before, sister, what he's doing is setting up the environment. He's creating the environment such that the next beat come in after him can assassinate people right here in this country under national security or homeland security or a terrorist threat, not based on you doing anything, because you haven't seen a shred of evidence that al-Awlaki did anything but run his mouth, okay? I still haven't seen any evidence that Osama bin Laden was involved in 9/11. I haven't seen a shred. The government admitted that he wasn't involved. They had no evidence that he was involved. They created a phony construct called Al-Qaeda, and they pull it out to do bombings whenever they want to go and invade a country. That's what they do. And now here you see them talking about Al-Qaeda is now in Africa, so we got to go get all 10 of them. Terrorism is the thing that they're using to invade Africa. It's as phony as a $3 bill, just as Barack Obama's as phony as a $3 bill.
And to me, it seems like, you know, he came in the door in a disguise, but now it's like it doesn't matter.
I think you're right on it again, sister. I don't think it's an accident that the people that occupy Wall Street, which I got serious questions about at this point now, but it's no accident that they're wearing the mask for V for Vendetta. You know, Obama came in with the mask, but the people have taken the mask and unmasked him, and now they're wearing the mask so that the government doesn't know who they are.
Right.
So,
or is it the government, or is it they don't want the people to know who they are?
That is correct. I would agree with you as well. Okay? But it's just so many things, sister. We just recently, Brother Talib Muhammad sent me this article. CDC official accused of child molestation. That's Center for Disease Control. Official accused of child molestation and bestiality. That was in Reuters for October 11, 2011. Okay? And the Bush family, what more can you say about the Bush family that ain't already been said? They've been involved in more criminal activity than probably any family. Let me see, was the Kennedys? Well, the Kennedys was involved in a lot of gangsterism with their daddy. But
right.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a family that's more dangerous than the Bush family. And they still out here. You know, somebody ought to poison their gene pool so that these bastards aren't allowed to reproduce any more Bushes. Okay? This is from Vox News, VOX News, July 24th, 1990. Homosexual child prostitution ring involving George Bush Sr. This is an archive of published articles of yet another of massively suppressed stories involving a family who was above all laws, the Bushes. It's entitled Sex in the Capitol. That's from Vox News, July 24th, 1990. This one was right out in the open, sister. This is August 25th, 1989. Sex sold from Congressman's apartment. It's a double article. One is dealing with a school used as a base for a sex ring in Washington, D.C., and the other is dealing with Barney Frank, you know, Mr. Homosexual, proud of, you know, his filth. Frank's lover was a call boy, and come to find out he was running a call boy ring out of Barney Frank's congressional office. And, of course, old Barney is still there because the House and the Senate is full of homosexuals, both males and females. They're all over the place. And there's been so many of them, it's like every year 2 or 3 of them get busted and, you know, forced to resign, and they put somebody else in there. And lo and behold, come to find out they homosexuals or pedophiles too. And it's just so many of them, you know, we don't have enough time to name them all. That's why I'm just going through these articles so people can go and get, you know, to see the overall paradigm that we exist in. We basically exist in a anything goes sexual paradigm. And so that's why the young people act like they do, because they've been totally conditioned to respond to this stuff the way they are. It's in everything. Okay? This article is entitled, Foley Lawyer Cites Alcohol Childhood Abuse. Okay? And this is dealing with Mark Foley. It's October 4th, 2006, American Buddha. And you'll find a number of articles at American Buddha, B-U-D-D-A. B-U-D-D-H-A. American Buddha, October 4th, 2006. This one I thought was interesting because it deals with one of the early members of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta who helped shape this country in terms of media, and that's the Luce family. Claire Booth Luce was considered the grand dame of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and her husband, Henry Luce, was a very well-respected higher-up within the Sovereign Military Order of Malta in terms of their Masonic linkages. This is entitled Tying Scion Accused in $15 million Sex Suit. The Luce Family War by Vicky Ward. Henry Luce was the founder of Time magazine and Fortune. Okay? Henry Booth Luce. You'll find him if you Google his name. Just Google Henry Luce involvement in CIA, and you'll find him very much involved in not just CIA but pedophilia as well, all the way up to and including molesting his own children. Okay? This is from the American Buddha for May 23rd, 2003. Okay? White House mute on callboy probe. This is from the Washington Times, July 7th, 1989. And what I like about this article is the Washington Times is supposed to be a right-wing newspaper run by Sun Young Moon and the Moonies. Is busting out this callboy probe at the upper echelons like President and up to Bush, all the way up to Bush inside the White House. And they got busted. And, of course, one guy ends up committing suicide. And just like all these other pedophile rings, it got shut down. That's from American Buddha or the Washington Times, July 7th, 1989. Two more. There was a book written called The Franklin Cover-Up. The Franklin Cover-Up. And this dealt with a child pedophile ring that was going on in Nebraska with a huge number of upper-level Republican Party dignitaries who were involved in this child pedophile ring from Lincoln, Nebraska, all the way to the White House. So you can just Google the Franklin cover-up, and you'll probably run into videos as well as articles dealing with that. The last article is, let me see here. Homosexual prostitution inquiry ensnares VIPs with Reagan Bush. Callboys took midnight tour of the White House. And again, this is from the Washington Times, July 29th, 1989. Okay? So you can see that there's been an ongoing thing, and of course, Barack Obama has his own connection, along with Rahm Emanuel being a part of this gay bathhouse up on the north side of Chicago, where we see and saw 3 homosexuals get killed very mysteriously, who all only had one thing in common outside of them being homosexuals. They were all parts of Jeremiah Wright's church.
Mm-hmm.
And that information has been out there for quite some time. I normally don't like to deal with this, but I think that this guy, based on him attacking black people all over the planet for white people, deserves no respect from any black person. And as far as I'm concerned, sister, and I hate to say it like this, but I will because he deserves it, he can kiss the far reaches of my armpit.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm just that peeved off about this guy, sister. I mean, it's just, you know, I just can't, you know, sometimes try to give a guy a break, but I don't think he deserves one at this point. Seriously. Because there's things that I know. And
Gaddafi, he was just doing so much for his people. Wasn't he putting water in the desert so they can farm?
Not that, sister. He was launching a satellite system to prevent the African countries from having to pay these white boys $500 million every year for satellite service. They would have to put up money with him one time and wouldn't have to pay no more, so that African people will be able to beam the things that they deem necessary to their homes instead of somebody else controlling the satellite systems and determining what it is that you beam into your, because they have a separate agenda. That, the water, the central bank, and just a whole number of things. And we saw it right in the open, sister. People didn't want to accept it, but they were saying that Al-Qaeda was being armed by the United States, France, and Britain to fight against Gaddafi. Now, if Al-Qaeda is the so-called enemy, how are you arming them to fight against Gaddafi? Now, that's in their major media. So you can see Al-Qaeda is nothing more than a construct that they bring up out the closet whenever they want to go and invade somebody's country under the cover of terrorism. And in the near future, anybody that says anything that's anti-government, that's why the government is now coming out saying they're going to be recording all internet radio shows. That means yours, as well as all talk radio. Because now that's going to be determined to be hate speech.
Right. And you know they already have a law that they came out with. I think it was last year before last, that deals with that. If you say, I can't remember, I talked about it on one of my shows, but if you could research it, it's a law dealing with talk radio or any kind of communication. And if you think something wrong or say something wrong, they can lock you up.
They call that cognitive dissonance. In other words, your thinking is going to determine whether you're a terrorist or not. And keep in mind now, they already got the machines that can take your facial expression and determine if you're a terrorist. Okay? You see, sister, what we're really at right now, if you really look at what's going on, and people don't think that the drones aren't flying over this country as well. They've been down there on the borders, down in Florida and Texas for almost 2 years now that I'm aware of. Okay? But if you really look at this, sister, what we really have is Terminator, the rise of the machines.
Yeah.
That's what we have. And Terminator, I want everybody to keep in mind, Terminator was nothing more than a part of the Matrix. It was the early part of the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at these drones, that's the rise of the machine.
Yeah.
Riding around, bombing people or flying around, bombing people on the ground. You know, they got the drones that have the infrared weapons on them and all kind of things. It ain't just the heavy artillery. And now they supposedly have suicide drones. I just read that the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So, and everywhere you look, these things came into play overwhelmingly under Obama. So I've just got to start calling him Franken-drone.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the monster origin of the drones, just like Dr. Frankenstein was the origin of Frankenstein. But I want everybody to understand, in the classic Frankenstein, even though this character was comprised of many, many different body parts, he still didn't lose his humanity. And what happened was, although the people didn't understand him, he understood the people because he was more human than they was. And at the conclusion of the movie, Frankenstein did what any logical person would do. He didn't go and kill the people even though they was attacking him. He went and killed his manufacturer, Dr. Frankenstein. And so that same drone that's being used now to assassinate people, and I ain't talking about one person. Remember, they killed 78 Somalians last Monday. 78 with one drone. Okay? Now you can just imagine 78 people in a room and a huge bomb drop on it and ain't nothing left but just various body parts. Body parts of 78 people everywhere. And media has sanitized this mass murder, okay, by only showing you the operators of the drones or a far-out view of these drones so that you don't see nothing but the video game portrayal of the drones. You don't see the number of body parts of women and children that are being blown up by these damn things by this guy. He's the greatest mass murderer in terms of black people in the history of this country. That's what you got. The greatest mass murderer of black people in the history of this country. No black person in this country has ever killed as many people, been responsible as this guy. So, and I'm going to tell black people again, you next. You mark my words. Because I ain't never finna stop talking about critical events as I can see them and document them. So I know I'm already on the terrorist list. Okay? No fly zone, no buy zone. Now we've got degeneracy like pedophilia attempting to be legalized by this group called Before You Act. B, the number 4, the letter U, Act. As a matter of fact, sister, they had a symposium earlier this year, a few months ago. I think it started in May or June. By August, it was all over the place with people discussing these people's attempts, the psychological community, in the world of academia and in the world of psychology and medicine, if you can call that medicine, because I don't consider psychology a complete science. And I have friends who are psychologists, they're black psychologists, but I don't consider this entire so-called profession to be legitimate because these people can say what they want to say. And it's like Steve Jobs dropping LSD before he dies on his deathbed because he wants to take one last trip before he makes his last trip.
Mm.
And that's the very same thing that Aldous Huxley did, who wrote the book Animal Farm, which gave us a peek into the future. Okay? He took LSD on his deathbed. And the media will portray it as something nice and, and what a guy. What a good guy, Unbelievable, sister. But you get caught with a tab of LSD out here and see where they want to put you. But when it's the elite doing these things, even engaging in pedophilia, now they want to legalize it, just like they want to legalize all these synthetic drugs. And I'm not against natural drugs, but I am against synthetic drugs, manufactured and produced by the petrochemical industry, which is where LSD came from, straight from Germany under IG Farben to the United States under the CIA, and particularly Sandoz. Sandoz, S-A-N-D-O-Z. You'll see that name written on many pharmaceuticals. They're some of the authors of LSD in this country, or what they call lysergic acid. Then they used the Beatles and other groups during the 60s to promote it, okay? So the Beatles come up with an album, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Right.
And that was code for LSD.
Mm.
Okay, Lucy, L, and the Sky, S, with Diamonds, D.
Wow.
And so that came right out of the Tavistock Institute, sister. The Tavistock Institute in London. You can go and check it out. Anybody can go and check it out. It's right there. And so that's why many of the white people hated the Beatles, because some of them knew that the Beatles were being used as a psychological program to get people conditioned here to begin to turn on and tune out. And they were very much associated, once they left Britain and came to this country, with the hippie movement. And so that's where that stuff came from, sister. That whole sexual free love thing and the whole drug thing go hand in hand with each other. They were both being pushed at the same time, both coming up out of the psychological community or a psychological construct being perpetrated by the intelligence community. And this is why it's so important for people to understand the intelligence community, because these are the people who dropped this psychological program out here under National Security Agency. That's what it's all about. So, as I was saying, sister, they had this seminar on August 17th, in June, where they said this, and this is from their particular website, under Living in Truth and Dignity, the 2011 symposium. Pedophilia, check what they call it, sister. Check how they changed the name, trying to change the language so you can accept them as something as a part of the norm. Pedophilia, minor attracted persons in the DSM, issues and controversies. This is Wednesday, August 17, 2011, beforeyouact.org. They say here, featured speaker, Fred Berlin, MD, PhD, founder of the National Institute for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Sexual Trauma, and a founder of Johns Hopkins Sexual Disorder Clinic. He was a part of this symposium that said this. This day-long symposium will facilitate ideas among researchers, scholars, mental health practitioners, and minor attracted persons, not pedophiles, minor attracted persons, surrounding the entry for pedophilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's DSM. Let me say that again. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association. This symposium will address the scientific and philosophical issues related to the DSM entry on pedophilia and or hebephilia, ways in which minor attracted persons can be involved in the DSM-5 revision process. DSM-5 is just whenever they meet and they have to change the definitions inside the DSM, which is, again, the Diagnostic and Special or Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Whenever they meet and they make changes, they change the number. So this is the 5th time that they've changed or revised that particular manual. It's like their Bible. They go in there to say, it is crucial that the DSM be based on the most accurate and complete scientific information available and on careful consideration of effects on the welfare of patients and society. This is especially true for the DSM entry on pedophilia. It has an enormous impact on the beliefs and practices of mental health professionals, the criminal justice system, the media, and public. It also has a profound effect on adults and teenagers who are emotionally and sexually attracted to children or adolescents, on the availability of mental health services for them and on relevant research. The revision of DSM provides the opportunity to address issues surrounding the DSM entry for pedophilia. Controversy has arisen over scientific issues, philosophical issues, the nature of disorder, and whether hebephilia should be considered a disorder, and consequences of the DSM entry, i.e. its use in civil commitment hearings and its effects on stigma. They consider you looking at a pedophile as a sick person, a stigma. Okay? It's not there yet. There's a process that they have to go through by basically conditioning people to respond in a particular manner by putting pedophiles like transvestites in comic roles and things of this nature, and that's what you're beginning to see now, so that they become an acceptable construct in the world that these people want to create for tomorrow. And I'm going to say this. It should be apparent now that there are 2 tracks that I'm looking at. One is the chemical manipulation of the gene pool by the petrochemical industry that has turned a huge number of people into homosexuals. And then you got this other thing that's really the dangerous thing. As long as we know chemicals, we have to love our people regardless, okay? Because we know that their genes have been manipulated. It ain't their fault, okay? But you got this other thing, this other track with these sick people at the high echelons of government and intelligence community and the music and movie industry, okay? Where we had a recent actor, I forget his name, who just sat down and said as a child actor, he was running for his life. And it wasn't just him. It was a young guy who got killed, who committed suicide. It was Kurt Cobain. He was one. There was a whole bunch of them. And that as young child actors, they were constantly being preyed upon by the movie producers and directors.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? And now we see it again, as you mentioned earlier, always being talked about in other places. Another article from Before You Act, their own website, is entitled, and this is their press release, and they're talking about, again, that scientific symposium on pedophilia and DSM. They say here, Today in Baltimore, Maryland, Before You Act brought together a range of clinicians, researchers, academics, and minor attracted persons to discuss key issues regarding the entry for pedophilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association. So I just wanted to show everybody, one last little piece here, if you'll find this interesting. They go in here to say, in the afternoon, talking about one of these sessions, in the afternoon, Dr. Renee Sorrentino from Harvard Medical School discussed legal, ethical, and medical consequences of the proposed DSM-5 entry for pedophilia. Andrew Hinderleiter of the University of Illinois argued that the medicalization of social deviance blurs the boundary between the helping professions and the criminal justice system, creating the potential for psychiatry to become a means of controlling undesirables rather than an agent of healing. Now, what are they saying there? They're saying that crime will probably be in the future associated with a mental health disorder. Okay? And if that's the case, could you be possibly living in a judge-dread environment where if you commit a crime according to the authorities, you are chemically induced to sleep for long periods of time in a perpetual prison? I submit to you, sister, that they're already, as we speak, putting in place a system of behavior orientation based on drug use. They will give you drugs based on a certain kind of drugs based on the kind of behavior that you exhibit. This is where we're heading here with this government monitoring of talk radio and classifying people as a cognitive dissonance when they say things that the government don't like. If you don't take your meds, you'll be locked up. And if you take your meds, you'll be locked up. This is why, sister, you can see with the Department of Children and Family Services, you can see this thing already being applied to poor people. Where we saw the sister in Detroit who refused to give her daughter those psychotropic chemicals. Yeah. She was labeled a criminal because she wanted to try natural means to deal with the psychological problems that her daughter had because she saw how her daughter changed with them damn drugs.
Yeah, and she came out of the conscious community, too.
I know she had to. And by the way, sister, I'm due in Detroit on 11/11.
Oh, you come in 11/11. Do you have, where will you be?
Brother Malik Muhammad, I'll have to send you that information because he's setting everything up now. I'm going to be there for 3 days. I think the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. That's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I think.
Okay.
So I'll give you further information on that, but he's working on that right now. And, you know, Detroit is like my second home anyway, so.
Right.
I always tell her I've been going back and forth to Detroit for over 15 years now, and I've always loved every minute, okay? I always tell people it ain't got all the money, but you'll know that you are in the midst of real black people as opposed to this phony Negro that we got here in Chicago that will sit back and be real comfortable while children are being killed all over the streets here. And they don't want to do nothing but get a gun and protect themselves because the selfish attitude of black people in this city is the real reason that murder is off the charts in this town because they have no respect for anybody that ain't white. That's how backward Chicago is. And so when you see people like Barack Obama and Jesse Jackson and some of these other folk, and you see how they act, now you know why they act the way they act. And I recommended a radio program. And anybody that go and listen to that radio program that I mentioned, I hope you don't anymore because they have a very ignorant guy on there. He just happens to be a minister who runs around here spitting out civil rights movement because he was ordained by Martin King, and I try to get him to understand that Martin King was not infallible. There are no infallible people on this planet. He made mistakes, and it's obvious by ordaining you as a minister because you was as shady as they come. He also made a mistake by putting Jesse Jackson as the head of Operation Breadbasket. Okay?